On May 31st, 1873, I came across the story of one of the most incredible archaeological discoveries ever made. While digging through the ancient ruins of Troy, Heinrich Schliemann uncovered an enormous treasure dating back to the early Bronze Age. Buried beneath the earth were silver ingots, elegant electrum goblets, and handfuls of precious rings. Alongside them were bracelets, buttons, earrings, and beautiful golden diadems that still shimmered after thousands of years. This remarkable collection eventually became known as Priam's treasure. Before long, most of it was acquired by the Royal Museums of Berlin. But when the Second World War came to an end, the victorious Soviet forces seized the treasure and it seemed to disappear without a trace. For decades, nobody knew where it had gone. It wasn't until after the Soviet Union collapsed that the truth finally came out. Priam's treasure had been hidden away all along inside the secure vaults of Moscow's Pushkin Museum. Introduction. I've always found it fascinating how some of history's greatest treasures seem to have a habit of disappearing. Many ancient collections have been lost, rediscovered, and then somehow vanished all over again. In some cases, they were gone forever. Not that long ago, people didn't always see ancient coins or jewellery as priceless pieces of history. More often than not, they simply melted them down for the value of the metal. A perfect example happened in 1714 when a farmer ploughing a field near the Italian town of Brescello uncovered an astonishing stash of around 80,000 gold coins. They had been minted during the final years of the Roman Republic. Aside from a small number claimed by local nobles, nearly the entire hoard was dumped into a melting furnace and turned into ducats, wiping out an extraordinary piece of history. That way of thinking lasted much longer than most people realise. Even well into the 20th century, Turkish farmers who happened to discover ancient coins while working their fields would often trade them to local goldsmiths in exchange for gold teeth. In some cases, those very teeth were made from the same ancient coins that had survived for centuries. Beginning in the Renaissance, ancient artifacts usually became valuable enough that people chose to preserve them instead of destroying them. Even then, though, money could still become the enemy of history. During the excavation of the enormous Etruscan necropolis at Vulci, thousands of beautifully preserved pottery vessels were deliberately smashed. The reason was simple. Dealers wanted to keep the supply of antiquities low so the remaining pieces would sell for even higher prices. In the rest of this video, I'll be taking a closer look at three of the ancient world's most famous treasures. One of them came incredibly close to being lost not once but twice. The other two disappeared completely, and to this day they've never been recovered. The first treasure I want to talk about is the world-famous Elgin marbles, the collection of sculptures taken from the Parthenon and other monuments on the Acropolis that are now housed in the British Museum. Their journey to England turned out to be far more dangerous than most people realise. In September 1802, 17 wooden crates containing the Elgin marbles, including 14 sections of the Parthenon frieze, were carefully loaded onto a small brig called the Mentor. Just 2 days after leaving Athens, disaster struck. A powerful storm slammed the ship onto rocks near the harbour of Cythera. Although everyone on board managed to escape with their lives, the Mentor sank into about 12 fathoms of water, taking its priceless cargo down with it. Elgin's private secretary had barely survived the shipwreck himself, but he wasted no time organising a rescue effort. He hired experienced sponge divers to recover the sunken treasure. Even with all their hard work, they were only able to bring 4 of the 17 crates back to the surface. Later, a Royal Navy ship attempted to lift the entire wreck from the seabed. For a moment, it looked like the plan might actually work. Then the lifting cables suddenly snapped, sending the Mentor crashing back to the bottom. Before long, fierce winter storms battered what remained of the ship until it was broken into pieces. When spring finally arrived, another group of divers returned to continue the recovery. They cut openings through the damaged deck and slowly retrieved 5 more crates. To keep the precious sculptures safe, the recovered cases were buried on a nearby beach beneath a thick layer of seaweed, which helped protect them until they could be transported. Even then, the job wasn't finished. It wasn't until October 1804, more than 2 years after the Mentor had sunk, that the last remaining crates were finally cut free from the wreckage and brought to the surface. By the time everything was over, Elgin had spent about £5,000 on the salvage operation, an amount equal to roughly $450,000 today. As incredible as that rescue was, the Elgin marbles faced another close call more than a century later. In May 1941, several of the sculptures were loaded into the cargo hold of the battleship HMS Rodney, which was preparing to sail to Boston. Only a few days into the voyage, those plans suddenly changed. The Rodney was ordered to help hunt down and attack the German battleship Bismarck instead. Although the Rodney escaped the battle with only minor enemy hits, the force of firing her own massive guns caused serious damage to the ship itself. As she struggled back toward Britain, German Luftwaffe aircraft launched attacks against her. At several points, the Elgin marbles came dangerously close to being lost beneath the Atlantic Ocean forever. By 1837, the Elgin marbles had already been on display in London for about 20 years. Around that time, a British Army colonel named Richard William Howard Vyse set off to explore the pyramids at Giza. He wasn't an Egyptologist or a trained archaeologist, but he did have something else in abundance, gunpowder, and he had no hesitation about using it. His most infamous act was blasting his way into 4 of the relieving chambers located above the King's Chamber inside the Great Pyramid. The entrance to the nearby Pyramid of Menkaure had been lost since the Middle Ages. At first, Vyse tried to force his way inside through the large opening that a medieval sultan had carved into the side of the pyramid centuries earlier. When that approach failed to get him anywhere, he ordered his workers to dig away the sand covering the pyramid's northern face until they uncovered its original ancient entrance. After the descending passage had finally been cleared, Vyse made his way into the pyramid. He climbed over piles of rubble, squeezed through narrow tunnels carved by ancient tomb robbers, and pushed through passages coated with foul-smelling bat guano. After all that, he eventually reached the burial chamber deep inside the monument. By the time he got there, every valuable treasure had already been taken long ago. Even so, one incredible object still remained in the chamber. Menkaure's massive stone sarcophagus was still resting against one of the walls. The sarcophagus had been carved from a single enormous block of basalt. Its outer surfaces were decorated to resemble the front of a royal palace, complete with stylized columns and deeply recessed panels. Historians generally agreed that it was one of the finest and most extraordinary artifacts ever to survive from Egypt's Old Kingdom. Vyse was so impressed by the sarcophagus that he decided it deserved a place in the British Museum. Getting it out of the pyramid was no easy task, and the job required even more blasting before it could finally be removed. Once it had been extracted, the massive artifact was transported to Alexandria, where it was loaded aboard a small merchant ship called the Beatrice. The Beatrice appears to have made a brief stop at Malta before continuing its voyage. After leaving there, however, the ship simply disappeared. It was most likely caught in a violent storm somewhere off the coast of Spain and sank with everyone on board. Along with the crew, the priceless sarcophagus of Menkaure vanished beneath the waters of the Mediterranean Sea, where it remains to this day. Despite many years of interest, the wreck has never been found. A few years before the Beatrice disappeared beneath the sea, another priceless treasure was lost under very different circumstances in France. Its story began much earlier in 1653 when a mason repairing a church in the city of Tournai made an astonishing discovery. Hidden beneath the ground was the tomb of Childeric I, the king of the Franks during the final years of the Western Roman Empire. Buried alongside the king and the remains of his horse were hundreds of ancient coins, richly decorated weapons covered in gold and jewels, belt and harness ornaments crafted from gold and inlaid with garnets, more than 300 tiny golden bees with delicate glass wings that had once been sewn onto the king's royal cloak, and an enormous gold signet ring engraved with Childeric's name and portrait. Ownership of everything found inside Childeric's tomb was claimed by Archduke Leopold Wilhelm, the governor of the Spanish Netherlands. He entrusted his personal physician and respected scholar Jean-Jacques Chifflet with the enormous task of carefully documenting every item in the collection. Chifflet devoted an incredible amount of effort to the project and eventually produced a detailed description spanning 367 pages. Not long after his work was completed, the entire treasure was presented to Louis XIV of France. It was first housed in the Louvre before later becoming part of the Royal Library's growing collection of ancient artifacts. Then, on the night of November 5th, 1831, disaster struck once again. Thieves broke into the Royal Library and made off with Childeric's priceless treasure. The investigation turned into a long and difficult search that lasted 8 months. Even with the assistance of the pioneering detective Eugène-François Vidocq, it took authorities all that time to finally identify and capture those responsible. Sadly, by the time the thieves were caught, it was already too late. Nearly the entire treasure had been melted down for its precious metal. Out of everything that had survived for well over 1,000 years, only 2 coins, a pair of the famous golden bees and the fittings from Childeric's swords, escaped destruction. The rest was gone forever. Even today, plenty of ancient treasures continue to disappear. Just think about the priceless artifacts that were looted from the National Museum of Afghanistan or the Iraq Museum. Modern archaeologists have incredible tools at their disposal, including advanced scanning technology and massive digital databases. Even so, once an original artifact is gone, nothing can truly replace it. In that sense, the physical pieces of history are still just as vulnerable and fragile as they were during the collapse of the Roman Empire. Before I wrap things up, I've got a quick announcement. My third book, Leaky Aqueducts, Battle Pigeons and Mystery Cults, is now available for pre-order. If you're interested, you'll find the pre-order link down in the video description. While you're there, take a look at my tour page, which is also linked in the description. You'll find information about my upcoming trips, along with links to the Told in Stone Patreon. Right now, I'm reviewing the first season of HBO's Rome over there. You'll also find links to my other two channels. I've recently uploaded new podcast episodes on Told in Stone Footnotes, and over on Scenic Routes to the Past, I'm releasing a new series of videos exploring historical sites across Spain and Turkey. Back when I was in high school, I read L. Sprague de Camp's classic science fiction novel, Lest Darkness Fall. It's a fantastic story about a historian who travels back in time and manages to prevent the Dark Ages from ever happening. If you're anything like me and enjoy alternate history, I think you'll also like Mincho Nyangi's web novel, Son of Julius Caesar. The story follows a modern man who is reincarnated as Julius Caesar's son and uses his knowledge of future events in an attempt to save the late Roman Republic from collapse. For a limited time, you can read the novel for free on Royal Road, and you'll find a link to it in the description as well. I hope you enjoy it, and as always, thanks so much for watching.